Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. On behalf of the organizers, I have the privilege to welcome you back to the Globsec Forum. I know it's always difficult to attend the morning sessions, especially if they are the Saturday ones, but I'm sure that the setup of our next panel promises a very interesting debate. Without further words, I would like to briefly introduce the chair and the panelists. The session will be chaired by Judy Dempsey from the International Herald Tribune. I'm sure that Judy will make it as live as possible. From my right to the left, we have Dr. Konstanz Stelzenmüller from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Mr. Ambassador Kurt Volker from the Johns Hopkins University, Major General Mark Schisler, Director for Plans and Policy from the headquarters of US European Command, Mr. Mikolas Zurinda, former Prime Minister and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, and Mr. State Secretary Bogdan Aurescu, State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria. Thanks, Judy. The floor is yours. Romania. I'm sorry.
What did he say? What did he say? It's right here. What did he say?
Yeah.
He said Bulgarian.
Oh. We won't dwell on this. Can you hear me?
Things went swiftly downhill from there. Right.
No? Now? Can you? I meant to keep talking. It's a kind of thingy-bob. Yeah. No, it's fine.
It's fine?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, yeah? What? Oh, there we are. Thank you very much. So, thank you all for coming. And I heard a lot of things about last night. So we're all very impressed. So we're very impressed that you came. Now, there's no housekeeping rules except one.
God, the acoustics are terrible.
We're going to have maximum audience participation. And the panelists, a very distinguished set of panelists, have they know how much they have to speak. And we're going to have a very lively, hopefully, question and answer session. Now, we have killed off, it's clear, European defence yesterday. And there's been such depths of doom and gloom that clearly we're not going to continue this. Otherwise, the whole conference will never, ever be held again, because there'll be nothing left to discuss, because everything will be killed off. So what I want to do with this session is just raise one thought and throw it out to our panelists and then to the audience. And this is this, that in fact, perhaps it's time that we recognized that the transatlantic relationship, the one we know, is over. In fact, it's dead. And once we recognize this, perhaps we can then move on to decide what kind of new relationship we want. And we must move beyond the whole defense issue and the whole security issue, but look intellectually and politically, socially and culturally, what kind of new relationship we want and what we want from it as well. And I want to try to make this a kind of theme of this discussion, because the whole idea of relationships, I mean, they can be fraught, they can lead to divorce, they can lead to marriage, they can lead to a peaceful coexistence, or they can lead to no talking, which is probably the worst thing possible. But I hope this is not going to end up here. And I would like to start off, it's very nice to have Mr. Zurinda, very pleased to have you here. I would like to ask, you know, your perspective, this idea of the transatlantic relationship. If it's dead, how are we going to rebuild it?
No, I don't think so that these relations are dead. I am a very strong fan of transatlantic coexistence or relations, and I am sure that there is no better or other alternative than NATO is. I remember the speech of Mr. President Bush when he said that we need Europe whole and free. So we should be courageous enough also today and to dream our dreams, to do something to have the world whole and free. And I'm sure that we have to protect our values as freedom, the right of life, rule of law, dignity, honesty, and so on. I cannot imagine a different option comparing with NATO. On the other hand, I know that if I may use such an expression, the business is not done yet in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in many other places of the world. But I feel strongly that there are many, many positive tendencies also thanks to NATO. Look at Serbia today. When we opened the airspace beginning 1999, in March 1999, I was at the table at the time. Many people shouted at us that we will bombard our brothers and sisters in Serbia, in Yugoslavia. And look today, there is a new hope for the people in Belgrade, in Serbia, to join the European Union, to move ahead. And look at Libya. Maybe it is not easy to speak about such type of conflict. But I feel again that thanks to engagement of NATO, people in the Arab world have also the chance for a better future. So I don't see that we should resign on transatlantic relations and friendship.
Well, of course I wonder about that. And I would ask the General to pick up on this. I mean, given that we have, what the title says here, a new generation in the US, different generations in Europe, and we're facing austerity, and we have huge, complicated economic and political problems with this relationship. General, what's your take on these issues?
Judy, thanks. Let me comment first on your very first comment and come back to the question about the generation. First, I want to say thanks to the sponsors of this event and let you know how honored I am to be a part of it and to represent European Command. Admiral Stavridis sends his warm greetings to all of you. But to your question about NATO, clearly the transatlantic relationship is not dead, is not dying, and is not even in danger of that. And I'm convinced of that not because of defense reasons and not because of military reasons, but rather the relationship plays out on so many other levels, particularly economic. And while I heard a lot yesterday about how difficult economic times are, budgets are tight, the amount of GDP produced by NATO, if you count America and the NATO nations, the European nations together, is 50% of the world's GDP. And so if we each contribute half from the European nations and half from the United States, it can't fail, because if it does, the world fails. And therefore, we carry a fairly large responsibility to make sure your suggestion doesn't happen, because it'll have calamitous effect across the world. The other reason, again, not military, that I'm convinced it's not dead, is because we share values. The values that Americans have, we got from our European ancestors. Those are the values that we stand up for together, and that's where we get to the defense part. Wearing a uniform, I couldn't be more proud of the contribution of NATO nations to ISAF right now, because that stands up and says we share the same values as those in the fight if we're willing to put our men and women in harm's way and welcome them back as heroes after the fight, whether they come back injured, whether they come back wounded, or even when we suffer casualties on the battlefield. That's the kind of partners that we are. That's how I know the partnership is there to stay. To the generation, really quickly,
Yeah,
I came into an Air Force 31 years ago. There were no computers in my squadron, and there were none on my airplane. I navigated the way Magellan and Columbus did with a sextant across the ocean.
Ooh.
That makes me a dinosaur, I'm pretty sure. But some of you in the room remember when there were no computers and we used slide rules in college. We're in a different place. This is a different generation. They're way more connected, and we can talk about that some more a little bit later.
Thank you, General. I'm sure Constanze and I, well, we know what a telex machine is, but so many people don't know what a telex machine is or was. But we're not going to get into a whole nostalgia of filing to deadlines. Constanze, I mean, I wonder about this issue of values. I mean, are we not driven more and more now by interests in realpolitik more than values, given certainly the economic crisis in Europe? Does this not condition our outlook about the nature of the relationship with the US?
I certainly remember what a telex machine is, and I also have memories of having to dial in to AOL points, if anybody remembers that. That was nasty. particularly when they didn't work. But this is our common journalistic experience. Now, values and interests, come on, Judy. I mean, seriously, I mean, this has always been, I don't think this is anything new about the relationship. We've always had common values, we've always had interests, some of which diverged and some of which overlapped. That hasn't changed. That said, I think a lot of things have changed about the transatlantic relationship, and that was what Judy's initial question was about. And I think that's worth exploring a little more. And since Judy is trying to get us all to wake up, let's slaughter some sacred cows, okay? First one. I think one of the biggest sacred cows in NATO is we do not have and we will never have a division of labor in the alliance. We won't have a division of labor on the hard and soft power or the hard and less hard power, and we certainly won't have a regional division of labor. I would say those cows are as dead as a dodo for the following reasons. Well, as for the hard power and the less hard power, if you look at the state of defense capabilities, you said we weren't supposed to open this particular bag of worms or can of worms up again, but it's true. We are disinvesting from hard power and defense capabilities, and the truth is that many of us, including the big three in Europe, are no longer just not quasi-uninteroperable with the Americans, but we're not even interoperable with each other. First point. Second point, regional division of labor. Of course we now have a regional division of labor, but part of that, but it's not just the Europeans' fault. I think that the so-called pivot to Asia, think of the expression what you may, is real, as is the American retreat from Europe. And I think the American retreat from Europe is a very reasonable thing. We are at peace, firstly. Two, we're grown up now. You know, it is perfectly reasonable for the Americans to expect us to take care of our own problems. The Balkans ought not to be an American problem, it's our problem. You know? And the same is true for supporting transformations in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. That should be our responsibility.
But Constance, I agree with you, except just to fill you in, we had the former Austrian defense minister saying last night that we don't want to take over the responsibility. We don't want to take over the responsibility of the Balkans.
He's going to have to.
The US shouldn't be in the Balkans. Not that we don't like them. We actually still need them. But we shouldn't at this stage. This is our backyard. This is part of Europe. And there's a reluctance, there's a fear of the Europeans taking the plunge in this. It's on the one hand, we criticize the Americans. Oh yes, you do all this fighting. We have to wash the dishes. And the Americans say, well, actually, you don't have to wash the dishes. Go on, do some of even the soft power properly. And then we don't. We shy away from it. Which brings me to our colleague from Romania. Minister, thank you very much for coming. I mean, you have a very difficult task. Your title is State Secretary for Strategic Affairs. And, you know, this is a hard hat to wear, given that actually Europe hasn't got a strategic culture. And we don't think strategically. I mean, perhaps, I mean, you can't even count on half a hand which countries of the EU countries have a serious strategic culture, particularly that we have never even updated the EU security strategy of 2003. So, tell me about this strategic culture of yours.
Well, that's funny indeed, and because as you know, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania, what I cover is everything but EU.
Oh,
so, but this is just a matter of management in the institution. And what I can tell you is that the title is very provoking. The title of this panel, speaking about generation change, about austerity, and about marriage in crisis. Well, we have asked this question for many times along history. We have asked this question, I think, during the Suez Crisis in 1956. We have asked this question in 2003 about Iraq. We have asked this crisis about the crisis in Libya. And we can ask this crisis also in times of peace as well. We can see this marriage in crisis in two ways. We can see and ask whether our marriage is in crisis, or perhaps better, we could see that we have a marriage in times of crisis. And I think that I would prefer, from the point of view of my strategic preference, to see the transatlantic relation not as a marriage in crisis, but as a marriage facing the crisis. And I think that during these times of crisis, I think the relationship becomes more well, solid. And we have to speak also about the generation change, because I think that this is also important. Indeed, there is a generation change in United States leadership. And it is a change in generation, and a generation that did not witness the Second World War and the lessons learned from the Second World War and its effects upon the transatlantic link and the European construction. At the same time, there is a change in generation also within EU. We can't ignore that too. What is interesting is to see that from the perspective of EU, the partnership with the United States is the most important partnership. It is the first of the partnerships. And the question is indeed, is it the same for the United States? And I think the answer is yes, but it's based on, well, perhaps other reasons than the previous generation in the United States leadership. I think it's based on the same values, indeed, and the general is right. We share the same values. We have the same interests. It is based on the need to respond to the same challenges, but at the same time, it is based on the need for pragmatism and efficiency. And I would concentrate on this when I'm supposed to answer on the need for an EU strategy of well, responding to these challenges. And I think that also for the United States, Europe is important. You can't ignore the contribution of Europe and the European member states of the alliance in Afghanistan, as the General said. What can we do more to be more efficient and more pragmatic? We have an EU strategy for security dating back to 2003, but we have a different EU. I think that if we count the member states of the EU, we have 13 more member states, if we add here also Croatia. We have a different international environment. We have a new strategic concept of NATO. And we have, of course, a very dynamic international environment. I think we need to see that we have challenges that we have to respond to. We have energy insecurity, we have cyber insecurity. We have challenges coming from the neighborhood of the EU, which is the same neighborhood as NATO's neighborhood. We have discussed just before coming in here about Black Sea and the challenges coming from that region. We have to respond to these challenges. We see globally that we face, in fact, the same challenges. Ballistic concerns, missile defense is important, and I think that missile defense is one of the best examples of how the United States is still interested and perhaps even more involved in Europe's security. But I am glad that Romania is hosting one of the sites of the missile defense.
Indeed.
So, just to draw the conclusion, I think the transatlantic relationship is valid, and it is perhaps even stronger, but it is a shift to quality here, from quantity to quality, from large number of soldiers based in Europe to, I think, better technology and, I think, more efficient, more pragmatic response. But we have also, in Europe, we have to do something more. We have to overcome our internal debates. We have to become more efficient, and we have to project ourselves as the EU as an international actor, because our soft power is, as a matter of fact, very strong.
Thank you very much, Minister. I completely disagree with you about the soft power being strong, because, I mean, the EU has struggled to this day to actually have a competent and well-equipped and professional police force in Afghanistan. Because of for so many reasons back home, the different cultures of police training, and also this lack of concept of what we want to do with the soft power tools. Despite our support of soft power, I think the Europeans are not good at it except for the idea of the enlargement, which is an amazing soft power instrument. Kurt, I would like to go to you about these challenges. I mean, we see the challenges differently, but I was wondering, beyond the challenges, you know, is there something more fundamental that actually does bind us, and which we can actually drive forward?
Yes. Let me come to that. So first off, Judy, I just wanted to comment. Your first point in opening this panel was that we killed off European defense. And I just want to add, and it wasn't even that hard. To turn to the fundamentals. I think when we talk about generational change, there are two things that you have to think about. One of them is, how is the world different now than in the past? And the second is, what lessons do you pass on from one generation to the next? Or what does that new generation learn again on its own? And this isn't the first time, even in recent years, where we've gone through these kind of shifts. And I mean, if you just think back to the Cold War generation, we were in a bit of a malaise until Ronald Reagan came along with some clarity and vision about what to achieve. And he had good partners in Thatcher and Kohl and Mitterrand, and made a huge difference. And then Clinton came in saying, it's the economy, stupid. And didn't want to get involved in Bosnia. If you remember the Bush 43 era, or the Bush 41 era, that we had no dog in that fight. But we ended up acting in Bosnia for some of the right reasons, to save lives and end a war, and it turned out very successfully by the end of the Clinton administration. When President Bush came in, we had budget surpluses. We weren't thinking about any security challenges. We were looking at how to work on our domestic political and economic reforms, and ended up with 9/11, and then going, drastically into an aggressive foreign policy strategy. NATO enlargement was something in the early 90s that no one wanted to talk about because it would be threatening. It would draw a new line across Europe. It didn't take that long a time before we realized that that actually had to be a foundation for the way we dealt with European policy. So I think we do go through these things. So to fast forward to today, what are some of the things that are different? One of them is speed. Things happen a lot faster. You need to react a lot faster. Technology has made that possible, both in terms of communication and also in terms of travel and movement of people and goods. Another thing is the distribution of power. It's not just us anymore. The Chinese are much more powerful, the other large powers, and also empowering non-state actors. I think that's a tremendously important development. The idea that you have regional issues, I'm beginning to think that that is fading away. I think increasingly everything is a global issue, that everything is connected in some way or another. Even if you look at quintessentially regional conflicts in Africa, the impact of China or of Europe or of the United States or of the global economy, the supply and demand for goods or commodities is tremendously important in even driving those conflicts. So I think we have to really think globally. And then finally, as Constanza alluded to, we always come into this question about what about values versus interests. And I would argue that as we've gone into a new period of time, it is increasingly clear that you really can't separate the two, that you only really achieve your longer-term interests of stability and of prosperity and of security if it's based on a foundation of values.
Absolutely.
And that gets to my point then about what do you pass on from one generation to the next. That's the fundamental thing to pass on, that you need to base your way that you try to engage in the world on core values of human rights and human freedom, democracy, market economy, rule of law. If you do that, you're building a long-term foundation for the way the world develops. We're in a bit of a crisis because of the financial crisis, because of new leadership or weak leadership, because of the complexities of dealing with this world that we've emerged into. But I think the challenge is really to relearn in a fresh generation some of these core issues about the basis of values to the way that we shape the world we're going to live in.
Thank you, Kurt. I think the values are fundamental. And I'm always reminded of well, it's happening every single day. The Chinese recently built a new African Union Center in Addis Ababa for a vast sum of money. And the African Union was very pleased with it. And I asked one of the diplomats, well, was there any conditions or anything? And the diplomat said, no, it's wonderful. The Chinese, they come in here and they don't set any terms or conditions. That's really nice. You know, you Europeans, you set up all these things, conditionality and everything. We're fed up of it. And this is where is an enormous challenge for the transatlantic relationship, I think, that if we go down the road of just either A, throwing money at problems, or B, competing with the Chinese or China, and indeed perhaps some of the other BRIC members, we actually undermine, we actually sell at a low price our values, but undermine the actual fundamentals of the transatlantic relationship. And I think this is a very important problem. I think it's time, if I may, throw open the floor, unless anybody wants to respond to each other here. Don't all rush. I think, okay, I'm going to take 4 or 5 questions. One, if you want to make a statement, make it very, very short, and only 1 question per person, and you've got to identify yourselves. You can put up your hand a second time, though, if you want to. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5, no more. I'll get another round, and then we'll get another. Please, you're first, second, third, fourth, fifth. The microphone here, please. Could you pass it down?
Thank you very much. I'm Jacques Rosier from the Euro-Atlantic Association of Belgium. A great thing is to put titles, and the great thing is then how you handle the title. And coming in this morning, I saw austerity and generation change. I think you can put austerity on both sides of the Atlantic, and you can put the generation change on both sides of the Atlantic too. The only question to be answered is, why is there a generation change in both sides of the Atlantic, and why eventually is there austerity, and what are the responses to the austerity? I think austerity on both sides is the debt crisis. The way we answer to it is either saving human wealth. It is social security, and it is the way you handle healthcare, etc. And the way you look to the generation change is what does the generation cares of? And my question is to the panel. Since 2 days, I haven't heard in the challenges anything on global climate change. And the way global climate change is looked after on both sides of the Atlantic is, at least for somebody not involved in, a little bit different. Is that true? Are we not missing really the real security challenge, being what to do to get the climate change under control? And then it explains a lot of how you put your resources in security-related matters.
Thank you very much for pushing forward the debate. We had the second one was here. Yes, please. Microphone here, and then bring it over there, please.
Hi, my name is Ben Cunningham. I'm the editor of the Prague Post. It's a newspaper in the Czech Republic. Brief statement and question. I guess I have a sense, and I think it's based somewhat in reality, that the newer EU member states, the newer NATO member states, are more invested in sort of a transatlantic mindset than a Eurocentric mindset. And on the point of the generational change, I also have the sense that young Slovakians or Romanians, for example, feel more European or more invested in Europe, Erasmus university programs, things like this. So I'm just curious, I guess maybe if someone agrees or disagrees with my first statement, and second, on the generational sort of shift, if there's any sort of sense that in Europe, the mindset of the younger generation who's sort of been raised in the European Union and this sort of thing is also shifting to a more Eurocentric sort of both security and overall values type of thinking.
That's
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question. We have over here, there's 3 people over the side. 1, and then 2, and then Andrew. Yeah. Yes, you. And then.
Thank you, Judy.
Yes.
I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Center for European Studies in Brussels. And, you know, if most of us agree that, indeed, improvement or continuation of the transatlantic relationship is desirable, and we also need to think about practical ways of what's the next project. And I think there is some political will in Washington and some in Brussels and in some of the member states' capitals to make this year and next year the breakthrough year on transatlantic economic relations. So my question to the panel is, I mean, is this just what we've been hearing for many, many years, that we need a common regulatory framework, that we need a free trade agreement, or, you know, are we... is this time more than just rhetoric? And how can the domestic obstacles in the United States and in the European Union be overcome? And the last question is there really that much to be gained? Because, I mean, we have renowned economists in Brussels who claim that, the actual added value of a free trade agreement between Europe and the United States wouldn't even be that great.
Thank you very much for this. It really begs the question about the whole worth of summits, since they, a 6-hour flight and then 2-hour summits, and then you're back again, and it goes off the agenda for another year. We have Andrew Michte and over here in the corner. I'm going to take these three speakers, and then we're closing it. Andrew, and then Henning, and then the gentleman on your left. Please.
Thank you very much, Judy. Andrew Michte, GMF. Just a kind of broader observation to the panel, and Constanza knows this. When we did Transatlantic Trends last year, which is a major polling data set that GMF puts out, one slide was staggering on generational change. When we looked at the question, is Asia more important to you in the United States or Europe? There was what I called a sliding scale. People in the age bracket of 18 to 24 were 75% Asia, then Europe. And then as you went generationally, from the young undergraduates to graduate students to people in their professions, you had to get to the McCain generation to actually have people equalize their answer, roughly. And then you went to the great generation of Tom Brokaws' narrative, and then you had, yes, Europe is more important. I'm struck by one kind of phenomenon, undertow, as I work in Europe now. Those kids who say Asia is where it's at, these are my students a year ago at the university, and these are your future soldiers, officers, professionals, and everybody else. When I go to conferences like this, we all agree that this relationship is important. General Sisler was talking about the vitality of the military dimension. Kurt was talking about the political aspects. But in the final analysis, it's going to be the public backdrop that will determine how strong that relationship is going to be. And with all due respect, we can have these conversations in the self-contained environment, but just like Ivo said yesterday, if we don't take that message to the public, if we don't make NATO a reality in Alabama and Tennessee and Arizona, we can talk till we're blue in the face. And ladies and gentlemen, when that 1824 becomes 4050 and becomes the dean of the university and becomes the president of this and that, we will have a very different world, regardless of what we're saying. And I think we're missing the public diplomacy piece of the transatlantic relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for this. Henning, and then the last question.
Thank you. Henning Rieke, German Council on Foreign Relations. On the question of like the common understanding of security in Europe, I see that the Americans have no longer the interest to pay the bill for European security, which is perfectly understandable. And the Europeans are not yet able to take care of it themselves. So even if we decided here and now and today to shift strategic culture and to change procurement and defense policy towards a more independent European defense, how much time do we have? What do you think? Looking at the procurement cycles, at the shifts on the societal level to make this happen, how much time do we have until NATO is dead?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And over here, and then we throw it back to the panel, please.
Good morning. I'm Petr Kolář, the former ambassador to the United States, Czech former ambassador to the United States, and currently ambassador to Russian Federation. I have a few comments. For me, it's kind of the folklore, speaking about, I try to be short, speaking about the lack of mutual interest. This is what we were using when I served in the United States together with Ambassador Kacher. We were using this argument to the administration of the United States quite often, that you are losing the interest in Europe, that they are just shifting their interest to the other part of the globe. One comment from Zbigniew Brzezinski, I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing that, was, well, what do you expect after 20 years of the marriage? You should be more patient. There is less passion, more patience needed. And it's absolutely understandable. When I see it now from the angle of Russia, I can say that European and American companies are working together. They are expanding to the rest of the world. American companies based in Europe are working with others in Russia and in Asia. So I am absolutely not afraid of the quality of the future of the partnership. The quality is different, that's true. The risk for our partnership is the growing hypocrisy. And I have to, speaking about values, I have to say that when I look at it from the angle of the ambassador in Russia currently, that's the real threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we've got a lot of questions here. The climate change is clearly very, very important. Henning is wondering when is NATO just going to disappear? How much time do we have? But I think we should, who would like to take up, I think we should take up the climate change first, because it's true, it wasn't an issue here at all over the past day and a half, but in fact it's staring at us in the face here. Anybody want to take up climate change? And if you don't want to, we can leave it till later, if there's any burning issue any of the panelists want to deal with right now. I see climate change. Okay.
Come on. No, Judy, come on.
There's
We'll
one.
do it.
Well,
We'll do our homework.
Okay.
I think
Judy,
this is.
Hello. Here.
Oh, sorry, good. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, or should
Go
I?
ahead.
Well,
Both do it.
Look, of course, climate change can have an important effect on us. We've seen some effects already. There's both reducing our footprints and there is reducing the impacts. But I think you have to stack things up in your Maslowian pyramid as to what is the most essential thing to tackle. And while we need to tackle that, before we get to that, we're going to have to tackle some of these values issues about what is the direction of basically freedom and economy and democracy in the world, and also how are we going to structure our societies so that they are sustainable politically and economically over a long term. As we do that, we'll have to do our best on climate too, but we can't just focus on that at the expense of some of the bigger, longer term things we've got to get through.
Well, let me just add a couple of remarks to that. Climate change is a useful example, and one of several, of the new kinds of security risks that we need to factor into our strategic thinking as an alliance. And it's useful in several ways. It's intrinsically a global issue. In other words, it's not amenable to solution by command, by a voluntarist alliance decision. It is something where we actually need to change the way our societies behave, where we need to change the way our economies work, and where we are going to have to persuade, rather than coerce, countries that don't share our values and don't share many of our interests. It is therefore an almost intractable problem, but one that we're going to have to resolve. As such, it's very typical of the new challenges that we face, and that are going to require a far more sophisticated diplomacy and persuasion and public diplomacy on our part than we've had to exercise before.
It's interesting you say this. I want to pick up the comment from Ben, just testing. Ben, about the younger generation. I wonder, is there? I mean, the older generation has been saddled with very different problems and a different legacy. And as a younger generation now begin to take the reins of power, I wonder is the younger generation it's changing or trying to change the agenda? What Andrew was saying, you know, how they see Asia, you know, is the orientation more away from the US towards Asia? Do they have different interests, different values? I wonder, it's what Kurt was saying, what do we hand over to the next generation? Are values actually part of this outlook of the younger generation? And climate change is a value. I wonder how does the panel see this, the next generation? I mean, it's already taking place in Europe. The next generation is in power. I mean, the post-war generation.
Judy, I'll
please.
join in. I think in our audience this morning, there's a group of young leaders that I had the pleasure to speak with yesterday. It always reinforces my experience of those 20 or 30 years younger than me. These folks, a bunch of them I see in the third row, the young Atlanticists, have paid attention to the things that my generation, your generation if you're with me, the things we're so troubled by, and in some cases they can just, with a hand wave, be done with them. That stuff doesn't matter. Some of them are social issues. Some of them are because they've had experiences that we didn't have as we grew up. Some of them because they're much better educated than I was at their point in life. Remarkable difference in the young men and women that I see joining our military and as I visit your militaries. The quality of your enlisted soldiers, airmen, sailors is remarkably better than it was 20 or 30 years ago. It's measurably better. This generation that follows us is connected in a way that we never were. Interesting question about whether European youth are Eurocentric or global-centric. I don't, with authority, know the answer to that, and I'm way out of my league even commenting on it. My experience tells me that they're much better connected to the entire world if you look at a Facebook map. Whether they're studying that or whether that's where they work or whether that's where their passion lies, that's where their relationships lie. And so I'm convinced when you look at that, they must have interest and they must have ability to speak on those things well beyond the ability I did. I communicated with kids in my neighborhood. They communicate around the world every day. I communicate with my kids back in Virginia every single day, even though I'm a continent away. And so they do the same thing, but they're way better prepared to inherit the problems that we've struggled with so hard, really hard. We've struggled with some things, and they just wave them off, like the Cold War. I was in the White House one day and heard a 30-something person on the staff say to someone about our age up on the panel, sir, I'm not really affected by that Cold War way of thinking that your whole generation is. That was a pivotal point for me in realizing that they approach things differently than we do, and that's not bad. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. A brief intervention, and then Minister Jurgen.
Yes, I want only to confirm that it is not easy to speak to young people about the need to invest into security area, especially in this time of austerity. When I was a boy or a young man, it was an obligation to serve in army. 1 year or 2 years. Now it is voluntarily. So I mean that these days bring a big challenge, especially for politicians, to speak to young generation very openly about the need to finance security, to help to young people to understand better that if something happens between Iran and Israel, we are in danger as well. Young people want to travel, but they are not so keen on pay some fee, for instance, for their studies. So big challenge for us, for politicians, being more honest, more open to travel and to speak to young people about the need to finance this need to protect our highest value, because I believe that the right to life or to protect freedom, our values, security is the best value.
Kurt, you wanted to
I did.
briefly...
I just had a thought that was sparked by something the General said. In my observation, the younger generation, Facebook generation, is very highly attuned to values. They don't express them the same way, but in terms of their sense of justice and good and bad, it is very sharply felt. And I think the challenge is as you move through people into government policies and actions, and how do you take on big activities in the world? What do you do with Iran, for example? Translating that into policy is something that has yet to be learned. And they're also building new tools through some of their own connections. The Twitter, Facebook communication as inspiring revolutions that have changed politics. I think that is one way in which they're creating new means of affecting things, but there is still a degree to which either values and ideas and structures have to be passed on, or they have to learn them themselves to turn those values into a practical effect.
Well, it's a very important point, and I'm going to take the second, absolutely. I'm going to take the second round of questions. And Ginnik, if you want to intervene on this issue, wait 1 second. I want to, we have to focus on this panel, on the generation which really now getting into it. Austerity, do we compromise values, and what this means for the relationship. Ginnik, other hand, number 2, number 3, number 4. Okay. Ginnik, smaller here, please.
Some of you...
introduce yourself, yeah.
Eugeniusz Gienek, smaller from Warsaw. Some of you might know that not only I was dwelling as an expert in foreign affairs, but I'm also a media man, 24 years with the BBC and chairman of the Polish radio for a while. and I deal with the media. We are, and I would like to follow what Andrew has said. We are all going to face, in terms of generation change, a major problem. Because the young generation using all these social media are very individualistic. And if you are Kurt, you are right by saying that they are, as human beings, responsive to the problems of human rights, etc. They are much more responsive to individualistic, personal approach to those problems, not community approach. And see, this generation doesn't read newspapers. They will not have a shared agenda. This is a major problem, not just for NATO transatlantic relations, but for the democracy as we know it, party-based democracy. The problem will be that those guys have their own newspapers which they create. I do as well, but you know, that means I can actually go through life without reading what you read in newspapers, economic page or sport page or foreign policy page. You just read what you like to read, only. And that's going to be a problem for the policymakers. How to create, first of all, a national agenda, how to create international agenda, and I bet what I can see the Polish youth. First of all, the same research done by GMF US suggests that the NATO went down among the young generation drastically. And this is a result of Iraq and Afghanistan experiences. And it's always refreshing to listen to our American friends because the world always starts tomorrow for them. You know, as the past wouldn't exist. I think we have a problem here of sort of communicating our experiences between Europe and so here we have a basic problem of communicating with the young generation, and it's not going to be easy to solve.
First of all, Ginnik, people have always read what they wanted to read in the newspapers. I mean, yeah, you know, I mean, you know, but now they just read differently. I mean, the fact that they're reading on iPhones or whatever, you know, they're reading. I take your point about the individualism. It's the atomization of this. I remember reading an extraordinary piece by Lucy Kellaway in the FT a few weeks ago, and she was talking to these young people. They've never gone into an office. They do business over Skype or whatever. Sometimes they see each other, other times they don't, but it's the atomization of this and how this, I think it's a really interesting point, how this feeds into the democratic process, how this feeds into the old political parties who haven't actually grasped this, and we see this certainly in Germany and indeed in other countries where populism is actually filling part of the vacuum. We have a question over here, and we had a question here and there. Oh yes, okay. There, the lady there, and then you, and then yes, yeah. Okay, thank you.
My name is Farida Allagi. I'm from Libya. Let me tell you that the Arab Spring, it was amazing how much the younger generation connected globally. These young people in the Arab world were connected to solve so many internet problems, to get so many ideas from youth from all over the world. The irony is, despite the fact that we in the Arab region have all this mistrust in the West interest, and this is where we still have problems, my generation, values versus interest. But the younger generation, in my opinion, maybe once they are the future politicians, are going to do the business better than we do. And many of you have followed that this Arab generation, when they went out in the streets, they didn't shout for religion, for ideology, or for, you know, against the West. It was dignity, freedom, justice, human rights. And this is, in my opinion, the agenda that is connecting our future generation. I'm happy to hear this morning that politicians have to listen, have to be humble. It is not easy, you know, for us after 50, 60 years of age to change. To be honest with you, my daughter has been trying to change me for 10 years. So I do believe that the time has come, if we are all sincere, to really build a better future for our grandchildren. We need to give a chance to this new generation. And this is the problem in the Arab world. The revolution are being hijacked, and many of us are fighting with the younger generation that this revolution is not hijacked by, quote unquote, the experts, the politicians, the religious elements, blah, blah, blah.
Bruce Jackson over there, thank you for this. I would like to make this taken up later. Yes, and then we have, yes.
I'm Paul Louis from the Austrian Institute for International Affairs in Vienna. I want to get a small step back and see the big problems, I think, for transatlantic relations is, on the one hand, we have the crisis of the welfare state in Europe. On the other hand, we have the attempt to establish a welfare state, a more extensive welfare state in the United States. Both things mean that Europe and the United States are more internally oriented because of these problems or these attempts to create a new kind of society. And just now we have this, as we heard, Libya in Europe's neighborhood, big problems, but also big chances. And my fear is that the Europeans, but also the Americans, don't take up these chances, what is now happening, for instance, in North Africa during the Arab Spring. And the big problem is that the young generation, because of these things, the crisis of the welfare state, have to look for their chances internally and maybe don't see the chances we Europeans have in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a question over here, and then I think we'll put it back to the panel.
I'm Fredrik Löfqvist from the Swedish Embassy in Vienna. I have a question. I'm a little bit puzzled. My question first, and then I will explain the background to the question. I'm a little bit puzzled that we're not, a panel like this or a conference like this has not addressed the issue of economic values at all. You don't have to be Marxist necessarily to think that economy and finance is important. And the background of the question, I think we're in a bit paradoxical situation that actually the Europeans are getting more traditionally right-wing. We don't think that monetary expansion is a good thing. We don't think that printing money is a good thing or borrowing more money to solve the problems. The advice we're getting from Washington right now is that we should print more money and to have a strong monetary expansion, as if we've all forgotten the lessons of the 70s, which took us 10 years in the 80s to learn on both sides of the Atlantics. And why are we not more, the title of the conference is Austerity in Europe. Why are we not more preoccupied with the financial structural imbalances in the US?
That's very interesting. We dealt with it in a different way in the first session, the very first session on Thursday, but it is very important, the whole idea of the economic ideology of the values of the two systems. I would like to go back to this, and that ends this session. Panel, I think we should start off. I'd like to deal with the economic values first, if anybody wants to pick up this. I think it's quite important how, I mean, there is a kind of clash of cultures in how we deal with the economic crisis, and America is really suffering on this at the moment with the huge unemployment and dislocation. General, would you like to? No, you wouldn't. Yes, you would. I've asked you, okay? Would you like to deal with the economic values, or do you want to?
Just briefly.
Just briefly.
I actually think there's people on the panel that can speak to this better than I can, but let me get us started.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges of what we're talking about there in debt crisis is all of us have it at the same time. And so it's affecting all of us. There's no easy solution, and it's not even a global solution. So nationally, we have to work our own corrections, and those have global effects. But it's very hard to figure out how to sew all that together. So with that set up, let me turn it over to people that are qualified to speak to that.
But the economic values feed into the political values, feed into the stability of democracy, feed into the whole idea of security. On that issue, I want to take up Ginnick's point about the impact of the immediate the connectivity and the individualism. What actually that does to security? I mean, stability, more. Political participation. Are we moving away from established political parties or to parties without formal structures? I mean, there's something seriously happening in Europe. The Tea Party tried it in some ways. It's a very interesting. What? Yeah, I mentioned, I touched on that. Thank you, Ginnick, for that. I touched on this. Constance.
I think that this is a key issue on several levels. The challenge here is how do we maintain and recreate a sense of community, both in our own countries and nations, within Europe and within the alliance. And the truth is, you have to do that anew for every new generation. You have to find new narratives, both for Europe and for the alliance, because strategic contexts change, generational experiences change, and we cannot expect people who are 20 or 30 today to share the experiences and the, if you will, the view on life that we have had. If I may speak for myself for a second, my parents were children of the war. My father was drafted in 1944 as a 17-year-old, and had the great luck by making a decision in February of 1945 to swim across the Elbe to become an American POW rather than a Soviet POW. This does shape things, and I was told these stories. And my dad was, if you will, very effectively Americanized by this experience. The Americans put him through translator school, then he worked for the High Commission, and this, I think, shaped his outlook, and in many ways then shaped mine. My mother was younger, of course, was a child, experienced the bombs in Berlin. Let me tell you perhaps a story from my mother. In the 1970s, we were living in Washington, and in '76, the bicentennial, the Americans bought, I think, 300 tons of fireworks from the Chinese in red, white, and blue, and shot them off up above the Jefferson Memorial. And my 12-year-old brother desperately wanted to see this, so my mother went and took him. At some point, I wasn't there, my mother told me this story. At some point, she said, it just reminded me too much of the bombs in Berlin. So I sat down on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial and, covered my head like this. And then a little later, I looked up and I saw a young man half my age doing this. And then my mother said, to explain, I was in Berlin in 1943, and the young man said, I was in Vietnam.
Gosh.
Yeah? So, these are things we cannot expect 20-year-olds to understand. You and I understand war because you and I, as journalists, have covered war regions. We know just how horrific the damage is to societies and polities. But it is absolutely true that we need to find new narratives. Now, let me make a suggestion, and then I'll stop talking.
That's
the
very
new narrative for Europe, the new narrative for the Atlantic Alliance, what is that? It is the fact that we are all democracies. We are rights-regarding, constitutional, accountable democracies. That is something that we share, and that is profoundly important. And that I think that the older, there is where age does matter, the older you become, the more you realize that matters, particularly if you travel in areas where that is not the case. And I think one of the great, to be very honest, to be a little emotional here, one of the great joys of the Arab Spring and of the protests in Russia is that we now see younger people in Russia, in the Arab countries, the Muslim world, and yes, in China, demanding rights, accountabilities, liberal freedoms that we Western countries have very often claimed for ourselves, but said, we have to talk to your rulers and not to you civilian populations. And now they're claiming this despite that. I mean, we haven't done much to deserve that, but it is a huge, I would call it strategic luck, and it is an opportunity that we should grasp, because otherwise we will be failing these new generations.
Thank you, Constance. Just one point before you can. I think it's so important what you say on this, because it just shows the weakness of strategic planning. You can never know what's going to happen next. No matter how well you plan, we didn't expect these protests against Putin. We didn't expect the overthrow of Gaddafi. And just one thing about the younger generation, there's an awful lot of young people, young men and women in the armed forces in Iraq and Afghanistan who've gone through a very different experience as well. Very, very interesting. You wanted to, Mr. Orescu?
Yes, I wanted to say that indeed we have this problem with the individualistic approach, but this is also the responsibility of the politicians. And there is also in Europe, in many countries in Europe, inside EU, a huge lack of trust in the capacity of political parties to deal with the situation. And this is also due to the nationalistic approach and the nationalistic speech that we face inside Europe, cultivating the fear of the strangers, cultivating the fear from the barbarians from outside, coming and invading our beloved Schengen space. The fear that the strangers would come and steal our jobs. And this is only for a few votes, a few more votes. This is also having an impact upon how EU works and how EU communicates Europe to its own citizens. Because inside EU we also witness the fact that the decision, instead of being based on the community method, is going to the sovereignty-based intergovernmental method. Absolutely. The answer to the crisis, you have mentioned the economic values. Indeed, we had an answer to the crisis inside Europe, and this was the fiscal treaty. But the fiscal treaty was a result of the intergovernmental method. What we have to do in order for EU to become stronger and stronger outside EU and to join United States in this global endeavor is to go back to the community method and to make the EU stronger, to redefine our values. We have done a lot in defining our neighborhood. We have defined our neighborhood policy in the East, in the South. We have to do more in terms of strategic approach. That's why if we revise the EU security strategy, we have to do something about our neighborhoods. Climate change, indeed it is a challenge. And it is a challenge that both the United States and Europe have to deal with. But this should be seen also in a bigger package. Climate change comes together with food insecurity, comes together with energy insecurity, comes together with sustainable growth, and even with cyber insecurity. All these are to be treated perhaps in a complementary manner to the approach of NATO and the United States. It is interesting to see how similar responses we had because of the austerity times, both in NATO and in the EU. NATO developed, and we are in the process of adopting in Chicago, the smart defense doctrine. Well, EU is developing the pooling and sharing. We have to bring these together and to build on these, common approaches based on, again, pragmatism and efficiency in dealing with challenges that we both, United States and Europe, have to face.
Thank you very much, Minister. Any more? I want to just implant. The Europeans and the, we're talking, first of all, we're not talking about American and European values. We're talking about universal values. This is it. I mean, the Australians, everybody on the streets demonstrating, we all share the same values. I mean, that's the bottom line. Europe and America are not exclusivist on this. And it's these universal values that we have to promote. They're just fundamental. And any backtracking, we get on the wrong side of history. And we've done that too many times, whether it's in the Middle East or in other parts of the world. I just want to implant this. The new narrative, Constance, maybe should be, don't get on the wrong side of history because we've burnt our boats and we have only one chance now more with the younger generation, whether it's in Russia or the Middle East. I think anybody, yes, good.
Well, I don't know, are you
And
wrapping
then
up?
No.
Okay, well,
I'd
I'd like to touch on a couple things.
Away.
Maybe now's a good time because
Yes.
I don't know how it'll work out. But first off, I agree with that narrative you just laid out. Don't get on the wrong side of history. It's not a new narrative. It's an old narrative. It's just one you have to keep learning.
Yes.
And I think Evgenius made exactly a very key point. We're not, with these changes, we're going to see changes to democracy as we know it. It's not going to be democracy as we know it. It's going to be democracy as we don't know it. We're moving into new territory because of a new generation and new technologies in a different world. That's okay. And I think it, again, gets back to being founded on core values. There were a couple questions that were asked that I think we'll lose if we don't come back to them. But just on the transatlantic marketplace, good idea, not going to happen soon. And on the Asia, the German Marshall Fund Transatlantic Trend Survey and the importance of Asia and a younger generation, again, I think that's falling into a trap of thinking about the world regionally rather than thinking about the world globally. Of course, Asia's new, dynamic, it's important, it's personal technology products. People are interested in this, people care about that. It doesn't mean it's separate from Europe or separate from the United States because now we're sort of living in the same pot. And the key thing, again, is just what you emphasized. It is the role of universal values in shaping the way a global citizenry thinks about the world that we're living in. And then finally, there's a question about imbalances in the budgets in the U.S. Of course, the question is absolutely right. And I would say that we have a couple of pieces of homework, whether it's the United States or whether it's Europe. One of them is recognizing the relationship between our the world that we live in and our domestic health. That the world does shape fundamentally what's happening even in our own countries. We need to grasp that.
Yeah.
it also works the other way. We need to get our own houses in order financially and politically in order to play an effective role in that wider world. Thirdly, we need to get over the feeling that there's a separation between values and interests, because actually you only get to your interests through values. And then finally, it's the point that was made very eloquently by the woman from Libya, which is that values really are universal and they overtake a lot of the old mistrusts.
Thank you, Kurt. Constance, a quick word, and Milan, Mr. Jean, quick word.
I'd like to address the economic point. I mean, I think you sense that things have significantly changed when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, upon coming into office, says he's sorry that he basically missed out on his economics classes at West Point. It's by now acknowledged that one of the most significant risks in the transatlantic relationship is that of financial contagion. And, I mean, Kurt, you may say the transatlantic marketplace is not going to happen anytime soon, but the reality is that our economies, American and European, are integrated in such a degree that we are at significant risk from each other, and we remain at risk despite the stimulus packages and firewalls that we have been building. That's a huge issue, and we're going to have to figure out some way of dealing with that, and G20 summits are not enough.
Exactly.
This is just not enough of an answer.
Note of that.
And to put it brutally, I mean, in that sense, if you will, the Americans are a member state, a member state of a trade community. You are no longer fully sovereign in economic terms. You are massively exposed towards us, and vice versa. And frankly, if we're honest with each other, it's actually a triangle, because you're also massively exposed to the Chinese. You could even say that in economic terms, we're already living in a strategic ecosystem, to quote some of the advisors of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who wrote an article about this. That's something that we are going to have to figure into the way we think about security, but we're also actually going to have to find economic answers to this. So the gentleman is quite right.
Mr. Jean, you want to, briefly, and I mean, might have time for another round.
I wanted to add only that in democracy there are more segments responsible for the future of young generations, not only army, politics, or media, but also schools, universities, churches, NGOs, and so on. For us, for politicians, there is a big challenge to find not only a nationalistic approach, but also populism. Populism is a big danger to create the space for saving our values and to go on. The space in Europe is full of debate about the new economic governance, about a fiscal compact. Maybe the time is coming when we should start the debate about defense compact, how to create new rules and how to be able to stick to these rules. In 2000, in my country, we were able to create 2% of GDP for defense budget. Now only 1.1%. This tendency is not good. And this time is a challenge to open the debate, how to establish new rules and how to ensure being able to stick to these rules.
Thank you very much, Mr. Now, we have 9 minutes, so we're going to take 3 more questions. Now, it must be, no long statements, 3 questions, and so that we can then throw it to the panel and then we wrap it up. If there's 3 questions, yes, one. Well, 1 question will do too. 1 question, no? Nobody? Okay, please.
Thank you, Marek Matraszek from Poland. One theme that hasn't been discussed at all, and I'm slightly surprised as we're talking about democracy and values in Europe, is the rise of radical Islam. And radical Islam is obviously gaining, or has been gaining strength, not only outside NATO, but with the growth, but also within NATO, with the growth of radical young Islamic youth within Western Europe, particularly in the UK, France, Germany. Kurt Volker talked about how young people today are imbued with values, very deep senses of justice and rights. That's, of course, also the case with Islamic youth, but the problem is that their concepts of right and wrong, justice and injustice, duties and responsibilities are very different from ours. And as you look at demographics in the next 20 years, that's an issue which is going to develop more and more strongly. So my question is, how should Western elites be responding to this increasing disaggregation of values within Western Europe itself? How should we be working to integrate these potentially radical groups of young society which will be gaining in strength over the coming decades? Is this something that we should be focusing internally and not just internally looking at the threat of radical Islam from outside?
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to say one thing. We devoted quite a lot of time to this yesterday.
I'm sorry, I wasn't
No,
at
I'm
those
sorry, but
sessions,
if somebody, please, if somebody wants to pick it up, it'd be great. If no more questions, I'm going to throw it back to the panel to make, on your final thoughts about, was there ever a marriage? Oh, should it be divorce? was there ever a real marriage, or was it, modus vivendi, where the cohabitation?
Well, I guess I would say it this way. The transatlantic relationship was never an end in itself. It was a relationship because of a common purpose, which was to protect the values that we believed in our own societies, because we think they're the best way to organize governance, against external threats. And now we're in a world where not only have we been pretty successful at that, but that around the world, people are looking at that and saying, I want some of that same thing here as well. And while we are going through a bit of a crisis in finances and governance, it doesn't mean that the system is screwed up. And I think we should take a little heart from the way others are looking at our system and saying
Indeed.
it's still got a lot to offer compared to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that just that ties into the last point on radicals. Unlike what we would have thought 5 or 6 years ago, and unlike what one would have thought after the war in Iraq, I think we're actually seeing the world move in the direction of commitment to these values of justice and democracy and freedom and individual rights compared to where we were even a decade ago.
Judy,
Yes, General.
Weigh in for 2 seconds to say that if you want to use the metaphor of marriage, in America, when marriages are in trouble, couples go on the weekend to marriage conferences to try and work out their difficulties and come out with a better relationship on Sunday afternoon. It's Saturday morning and we're here together working on our relationship, so I think that suggests that we want to make this thing work out, and we're committed to that.
Okay.
And this is evidence of that answer.
Okay.
So I think we're okay.
Oh, okay. Mr. Rescu and Minister Rescu and Mr. Janet, and then I want to wrap up.
Well, I think we still have to work on this. I think
On
we
the
have the
marriage?
basis,
Yeah, okay.
we have the common values, the common interests, and also we share the common challenges. And I think that is also extremely important. I think that there is interest from both sides to enhance this relationship and this partnership. What we have to do is to overcome our differences, because we have some. We have to work inside EU in order to become more coherent in terms of strategic approach. We have to work more on the complementarity between the United States and Europe in terms of what we can do and the instruments that we have to use. But we are committed. I don't think this marriage is in crisis.
Okay.
I think this marriage is facing the crisis.
Okay.
And after the crisis, the marriage would become stronger.
Okay. Mr. Gender, and then we really are going to wrap up.
I
Yes.
feel optimism, and,
Delighted.
and I believe that NATO will be able to answer all decisive questions in the future. I come from the latest experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq, but also in Libya. There is no other option. I mean, only to think what should be done in a better way, and how to contribute in both banks, in America, in Europe, to this common family.
Thank you very much. Constance, and then we're wrapping up. Really.
Okay, well, I'm going to be lazy and quote something that I've written. You remember what Katharine Hepburn said about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, right? Which was, she gave him sex, he gave her class. But the same is true of America and Europe within the transatlantic relationship. We gave them cover in terms of numbers, legitimacy. They gave us clout. You know, that worked very nicely. Thank you very much. Now, as we've been discussing here this 1.5 hours, things have changed slightly. We have slightly different issues to worry about. But, you know, we've made it for 60 years. Let's not obsess about this and just get the work done. Jesus.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Constance. I like the element of this. I'm going to wrap up and throw out just a few points so that we can reconvene, not tomorrow, but next year. One is we don't need any more institutions. Institutions don't solve problems. We really don't need any more to deal with this. Two, there's a real lack of leadership in Europe dealing with the rise of populism. It is quite disgraceful that there's a right-wing populist, a far right-wing populist movement in the Dutch government, and how Sarkozy has used Schengen against foreigners. We need actual strong leaders to speak out against this. It feeds into Ginning's point. There's a complete lack of trust by younger people in the old established political institutions. That itself is a challenge, and it's about time that the established political parties woke up to this. And finally, Kurt, commitment to values. I hope you're right. I hope you're right, because we see more and more habeas corpus, for instance, being eroded. We see more and more people held in detention in European countries and in your own country without trial. We see more and more the ambiguity, and the Europeans don't speak about this anymore, of military tribunals. These are the values we have to protect, that these must not continue. 9/11 was a huge break in the post-war. So was Lehman Brothers. But we mustn't allow these two fundamental crises to erode, to chisel away at values which the rest of the world is aspiring to. Thank you. And I want to give for Saturday morning, thank you, audience, super audience, thank you for turning up, and a wonderful panel. Thank you very much for your contribution. It was very enjoyable.